Okay, let's get started. So hello everybody and welcome to the first in a short series of sector conversations brought to you by Cloudathlete. So over the coming weeks, Mark and I will be exploring some of the biggest structural questions facing sport, not just the operational challenges, but the deeper themes shaping governing bodies globally. And today we are starting with a topic that sits at the very heart of the sports sector, and that is membership. Is membership still relevant in today's world? And if so, how does the infrastructure that supports it need to evolve? Mark, a question for you. How does infrastructure that supports membership need to evolve?
It's quite a broad and challenging question. Thanks to everyone for joining us, by the way. So you and I have spent years in and around sport in various guises, in governing bodies, in delivery roles, in digital transformation projects, and membership's always one of the tricky conversations, which is why I'm stuttering right now. Questions like, is it relevant is one I hear a lot. Is it fit for purpose? Is it inclusive? Is there a better option? All topics that kind of, I've been part of at some juncture. But before we get into things, let's do some quick introductions, just the two of us, I think. So just for everybody's benefit. So my name's Mark. I'm the founder and CEO of Cloudathlete, which is a configurable digital infrastructure platform for sports organisations and governing bodies globally. Keely, over to you.
I am Keely Armit. I have had a 20 plus career in sport, working in sports sector, some time in two national governing bodies, 5 years at England Netball and over 10 years at Tennis England, which is where I met Mark. And I started my own business last year. And at that point, I began working with Mark on the Cloudathlete platform because I am so excited by it and what it has to offer the sports sector. So I'm delighted to be working with Mark and to be part of this really interesting webinar series that we are starting to record today. Let's start with the history of membership, because I think it's useful to have some context to this conversation. And membership in sport and in national governing bodies is full of history. Many national governing bodies now are well over 100 years old, founded in the late 1800s or early 1900s. Actually, I should say congratulations to England Netball on their centenary year this year. But when these organisations were first founded, membership existed to enable the governance of the sport through constitution and a democratic voting system. And membership was an important and essential part of the governance structure that allowed the sport to be organised and regulated and developed. And membership was, and still is in some instances, the mechanism through which decisions were made. Members would vote, elect leadership, shape the rules, and operate within a constitutional framework that helped to ensure the sport was governed fairly and collectively. But obviously, the sport and NGBs have moved on enormously since their inception as a result of the public funding that they now receive, the commercial investment that they now get, and many, if not most, now operate under a professional management structure where lots of the decisions that get made actually sit outside of the constitution and the membership and align more to commercial and growth goals and the funding initiatives that there are out there. And so while this doesn't necessarily impact the more traditional parts of sport, for example, the leagues and the competition structures, undeniably does impact governance structures, and things have changed, and the world has changed as well, hasn't it? Participation has changed, the way people engage with sport has changed, and what it means to be a member of a national governing body has changed too. And so I think it's just worth starting with that context. But today's conversation isn't really about that or the traditional membership per se. That's a very complex topic, and the conversation would be very different depending on the sport and the history of the sport. But today's conversation that we're having is more about whether the systems that support participation more broadly reflect and are suitable for the way people live and engage today, or whether they're actually starting now to hold sport back from further growth and evolution. What do you think about that statement, Mark, that potentially the tech that we've got, the systems that we use are holding sport back?
In principle, I agree for sure. Through the a lot of the conversations that I've had with sports leaders globally through very often this format, I've discovered that growth within those traditional structures is becoming really challenging for sport. Many membership numbers in individual sports have plateaued in recent years, and particularly after the pandemic. And in some cases, they've started to decline. So, kind of, as a provider of tech, if you like, and somebody in this space, I've asked leaders why membership growth is so difficult and why is there such a strong pushback from participants on paying membership fees, for example, which is often something we hear. Why is membership engagement so hard? Kind of why is there so much resistance to it? And there are lots and lots of different answers to those questions. One of the reasons is that lots of people are now participating in sport outside of the traditional membership structures. So in some instances, growth's happening, but membership products don't acknowledge or cater for these audiences. But also people's perception of membership is often poor, and the value proposition itself is quite weak. Membership's often seen as a player's tax, for example, which is a particularly ugly term, an insurance requirement. If you want to participate, you need to be covered, and your personal insurance might not cover it. A condition of league entry or so rather than something that enhances a member's experience of playing the sport and adds value, it actually does the opposite. And so sometimes membership is a barrier to entry. Membership models have been designed in a seasonal, linear way over, as you were saying, often more than 100 years with traditional sport frameworks and competition seasons. People pay annually, people get access to everything, people renew on a seasonal basis the following season. So once upon a time, that model was great. It made perfect sense from the way that sports operated for decades, and still does in theory for people that access sport in a very traditional way through a club or through a team or in an affiliated competition or a league structure, for example, right at the start of the season. But in a lot of sports, membership's now really only relevant to a percentage of the overall playing population, and as a result, opportunities being lost, we think. And today, almost every other part of our lives operates differently from the way traditional membership operates. For example, if you pick on something like Netflix, we subscribe to it, we pause it, we personalize it, we upgrade, we downgrade, all whenever we want. Annual all or nothing access increasingly feels out of step with how people make decisions, don't you think?
Yeah, yes, absolutely, it does. I completely agree. Actually, it would be really interesting to know how many NGB membership schemes still operate seasonally and whether there are any now that have rolling subscriptions. So if you're watching this live, there should be a chat feature available. Post in the comments, how does your membership run in your national governing body or federation? Is it seasonal? Is it rolling? And yeah, if it resets, does that annual reset create a problem? Does it create friction? I mean, it certainly did in the organisations that I worked with in the past, and not just a bit of friction, huge amounts of work actually for the membership department, for the marketing team, for the competition department, but also for the volunteer structures that sit outside of the NGB that help to administer membership, whether that's club secretaries or league secretaries, league organisers, regions, counties. It's an awful lot of work annually. And when I think back on it, it's actually bonkers the way that it operates, because we would spend 5 or 6 months of the year planning and marketing something that our members were already a part of. And if that time and energy could have gone into marketing to new members or new customers, then the growth that sports are seeking probably or possibly would have been more achievable. And I can't think of too many other examples of where you're a member or a customer of something and they then suddenly one day you're a member or a customer and the next day say, sorry, you're not a member or a customer anymore. You've got to start all over again. But I also remember the conversations that we used to have, particularly at Table Tennis England, about making changes to membership. And it isn't easy. Membership is highly complex. There are lots of different stakeholders involved. It's political, it's structural. It feels risky to make changes, doesn't it, Matt?
Yeah, absolutely. Most, if not all, NGBs rely heavily on membership income. Messing around with products makes everybody nervous in that space. The idea of moving away from predictable annual fees can can feel and be destabilizing for sure. But also, on the flip side of that, continuing to rely on annual fee increases isn't sustainable either. Standing still carries quite a lot of risk, actually. You were part of the NGB membership forum, weren't you? 20, 30 other leaders
Yeah.
in so what did you guys talk about? What sort of challenges did you come across?
Yeah, well, been a lot of the same challenges across lots of different sports. I think, there certainly is a desire to make changes to the membership products and participation products more widely. But there are a few factors that were preventing us from doing that. And as I said, membership is a very complex area. I think one of the main reasons that many national governing bodies were reluctant to make changes were for fear of membership revolt, basically, and the amount of work that is involved in making changes, that whole change management process that you have to take people through internally and externally, and the amount of consultation that is required and the amount of PR that's required. It wasn't that, that the national governing bodies didn't want to do that work. The capacity within NGBs is very, very limited. There are a lot of competing priorities and honestly it didn't necessarily feel sometimes like the right use of time and energy to do that. And members can be very difficult. There are a lot of very passionate people in sport with lots and lots of knowledge of the game, lots of experience, who think that they know best or they know better. So trying to make changes is difficult. And sadly, a feeling from members when change gets tabled that they're being sidelined, or that they're not involved, or they're not able to make decisions in the way that perhaps historically as members they were. That creates problems for sport, and not just the person that's in charge of membership. That noise travels up to the CEO and to the board of directors, and it's very difficult sometimes to deal with that. So I think that was one of the main things that would come up. But the other main area was the challenge of the technology to support some of the changes that we wanted to make. Platforms, membership platforms in particular, I think are very rigid. So anything outside of the bog standard membership product wasn't available and would need to be bespokely built. And obviously that's costly and takes time. And again, that's a difficult sell to the CEO or the FD or the rest of the senior leadership team when there are lots of other things to spend money on. And it just a very difficult area.
Yeah. And tech rigidity shapes behaviour, doesn't it? If your system only really supports annual payments and fixed categories and binary eligibility, then product design gets constrained by your infrastructure. And we've seen that in some of the sports that we work with. For me, the real question isn't just about whether membership's still relevant, but more about, can sports digital infrastructures recognise and support how people want to participate these days? So if you're a community club with 100 participants, for example, perhaps 20 compete formally or traditionally in leagues and competitions, but the rest just take part recreationally. So inside that club environment. So membership traditionally has been built around the competitions 20% rather than the 80%. So, where's the value proposition for the other 80, the social players? Where's I think it's very difficult for NGBs, for example, to provide this in a structured and connected way currently without the proper technology to do so. I think kind of if you are constrained and you must do things in a certain way, what choice do you have? Pay full traditional membership and get everything. You pay a lightweight membership and get nothing. I mean, perhaps insurance and a few emails, or sit outside the formal ecosystem, pay nothing, get everything your club offers, but remain completely detached from the NGB and outside of the funnel. What if instead everybody could access something completely bespoke to their wants and needs? Something more flexible, more a subscription-based membership that's built around them, for example. Competition access at whatever level and in whatever format they choose, from a bespoke menu built by the NGB or club, supported by the right tech, that sort of thing to me is kind of a better option. Things like personalized performance data, telling them about the wins, losses and heads-to-heads, video content, personalised content of real interest. These are the things that I think, all members want to see outside of the 20%. So,
Yeah.
I think
Sorry.
I'm not here dismantling membership per se. I'm more suggesting that there might be better ways of delivering it and ways to add value to membership, widening the ecosystem, don't you think?
Yeah, completely. And I think it's, as well as everything you've just said there, it's the insights. When everything sits within the same ecosystem, the data that gets collected and the insights that you get become really, really powerful. And it's not just who paid or who joined today or this week or this month. It's about, how are people participating? What are they engaging with? What do they value? What do they want more of? What do they want less of? That sort of insight is absolute gold dust for both product development and for marketing as well. So technology now is far more powerful than the way that it has been used historically in sport, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Historically, membership systems told us who's joined and who's paid, and very often quite a while after the effect. Modern participation infrastructure needs to tell us how people are behaving right now. And that shift changes all sorts of things, from product design, funding conversations, revenue modeling, strategic planning, literally everything. There's another layer here that we haven't touched on yet, which is volunteers, something I'm particularly passionate about. Much of grassroots sports still relies on manual processes, checking eligibility, processing renewals, reconciling payments, managing duplicate data, chasing affiliation, setting up competitions, administering results and communication. And when infrastructure is so fragmented, volunteers absorb that complexity. So, with a little bit of thought and a little bit of kind of extra work, if systems were connected across NGB, club, league and facility, there's huge amounts of time that could be freed up for those volunteers, and to be much more engaging for them to boot. And that time goes back into delivery, not admin.
The volunteer time and the staff time as well, that also gets spent in those same ways. So why don't people put in the chat, how much time do you think could be saved in your sport if there was better technology supporting some of these operations? And if there wasn't an annual membership renewal that had to be administered by volunteers and staff, how much time could be saved and what could that time be used for instead? Think about how sport could look in the future, because I think it could look very, very different with technology that is now available. And I don't think that membership will or should disappear necessarily. We did used to have conversations at Table Tennis England about, would it be easier if we just got rid of membership? That's certainly something to consider. I think, like you say, it's about broadening what membership actually means, and it's about creating something that is relevant and valuable for all the participants in the sport, not just those that want to play competitively and within traditional structures. Because, participation is so much broader now than it used to be. But actually, this is something that does worry me a little bit for national governing bodies, because I think unless they start to embrace the change and the way in which people now want to consume sport and participate in sport to fit more around their lifestyle, I think they're at real risk that more commercial organisations, because there's already lots out there doing it now, but more commercial organisations will pop up delivering the type of activity that people want to take part in, all underpinned by great technology. And they will just sweep up the recreational markets that exist in sport. There are, like I say, there's lots of examples of where that is already happening, sometimes just around the periphery of a sport, but sometimes more deeply as well. I was reading an article actually that I saw on LinkedIn the other day about England Golf, who are a fantastic example of a national governing body that have absolutely embraced the changes that they have seen and identified within the sport, and they've moved with the times and they're benefiting enormously from it. So their new participation products they have for grassroots participation and women, and their iGolf and iPlay products, all underpinned by great tech. England Golf now, I think, are the largest sports membership body in England. And they've seen massive growth over the last few years since the pandemic. I think they're up to something like 750,000 members now. They've grown like over 100,000 members in the last few years. So, that is hard evidence that membership is still relevant. NGB delivered participation programs are still relevant if they are done in the right way. But yeah, like I say, it worries me that if NGBs don't do this, that other people will. And I've got young kids, and actually when I think about it, most of their sport participation now takes not in traditional club structures or in NGB programs, but actually outside of that, delivered by commercial organisations that just offer a really great experience for the kids, no better than an NGB or a local club couldn't offer, I'm sure. But it's so easy for me as a parent to book them on, to pay a monthly subscription fee for it. If they decide that they want to have a break from that sport, it's easy for me just to do that. It's just a very, very different experience. And I won't name a sport, but one of my children did try to enter into a traditional club structure. And the first thing we were told is you need to take out a membership. And it wasn't cheap. That was the first thing that we were told. Before you can take part in this sport, you need a membership. And it was very interesting actually to sit on the other side of that fence and experience what that's like. But Mark, tell us a little bit about how the technology that you provide through Cloudathlete will allow national governing body products to be more relevant to a wider group of participants and new markets.
I mean, it is through a connected digital infrastructure. I mean, that is the key phrase for us. If you're going to engage diverse audiences, and if you're going to be agile enough and attractive enough to somebody who's kind of passing interest, then you really do need to have a handle on everything from one central point. Membership could evolve into something much more inclusive and much more valuable and much more personalised. If that was in place, you could have, for example, different access levels to a sport, different pathways through a sport, different engagement tiers, one collective ecosystem, basically, that pulls everything together, and multiple ways for participants to belong to their favourite sport. The focus then shifts from managing members into enabling participation. And that's really key. This is kind of moving out of a quite rigid structure through which people must travel and, kind of flipping it on its head and being much more member focused. So in my opinion, the governing bodies that redesign their participation architecture, not just their pricing, will be the ones that get to grow. And I think golf is a good example of that taking place. There is an example of a very old and very well established infrastructure that's changed its approach, and here are the rewards.
Yeah, and I think
this to me is about.
Sorry, I was just going to say with golf, it still offers its traditional format as well, doesn't it? It's not that it's you stop doing that. It's just develop something else as well in recognition of the opportunity that is there, that has been untapped.
And other sports are looking at making their sport more accessible as well. For me, it's about the design of opportunities and offers that show how reflect how people live, and want to consume, in today's market. This is exactly the tension Cloudathlete was designed for. Not a membership system, a digital infrastructure for sport, built to connect governing bodies, clubs, competitions and participants into one continuous environment. Because once infrastructure becomes flexible, product innovation becomes not just possible, but kind of a must, it becomes easy.
Yeah, it does. And it would be really interesting if national governing bodies were starting again with a blank sheet of paper and they were designing their participation programs and their membership products with a blank sheet, what they would actually look like, or if they completely reimagined the technology that supported it, what things would look like. So again, last one then in the chat, if you were redesigning your membership structure or your product portfolio from scratch, what would you keep? What would you change? What would that look like? I think this has been a really interesting first conversation on one of the key challenges within the sector. And we'd love to continue this conversation, so please do engage, put your thoughts, your comments in the reflection, your comments and reflections either in the chat quickly now or in the comments box when we post the recording. And let us know what you'd like to talk about, whether you'd like to come on and join us or whether there's a particular subject you'd like Mark and I to discuss, some sort of a structural theme that's shaping the future of sport. Mark, thank you for your time. Good to see you. And
Pleasure.
we'll catch up soon. Thanks, Mark.
Cheers.
Bye, everyone.